Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host Greg Tompsett today as we're going to be able to go through a little something with stepping back and taking a look at the action we've seen over the last 2 weeks and even over the last couple of years of what Brandon Beane has done and his strategy on roster construction, on contract usage. And we thought how better to go about that than to bring on a true subject matter expert. We have Brad Spielberger of OverTheCap.com and many other contributions here. We'll introduce him in just a moment. But before we get into that, make sure you're checking out everything we have going on at cover1.net. Have a lot of awesome stuff coming up there. We'll continue to bring you guys as much content as we can to keep you occupied as all the realities of the outside world are going on. Hopefully we can be a healthy distraction for everybody here while we're dealing with that. We have awesome draft breakdowns, things from Christian, things from Russell. Eric's doing awesome video breakdown. Come on over. It's only $10 to join as a premium member. We're doing in-depth video breakdowns of all kinds of different things, checking out the way that each of these signings fit in, what the roster battles and positional competitions are going to look like, where that fits in and the long-term fit, what is the domino effects on the draft and who that could put into play in these different areas. So come on over, check us out, cover1.net, jump in the premium Slack channel. We've got guys in here watching Brad and I record now, being able to talk with us. If you want to be a part of that, come and check it out. But without further ado, someone that many of you guys see on Twitter, you see him at BradOTC, and someone who's a contributor at PFF, a contributor at OverTheCap.com, and someone who's taken this a little bit more seriously than just a hobby. Brad, how we doing?
Doing well, all things considered, down in New Orleans, which is not one of the better places to be, but, myself and my family are doing all right, so things could definitely be worse.
Yeah, no, obviously, hope you guys are being safe and able to stay sane in your own little bubbles in a little world. Obviously, some of the news coming out of that region is definitely very serious. So, certainly wishing you guys all the best. For anyone who takes a look at your profile, they'll see that, obviously you did your undergrad at Vanderbilt, fantastic school. Now you're doing your law degree at Tulane and actually a part of the player negotiations board that's there and done some internships with NFL teams. This seems like more than just a hobby. Is this something you're hoping to turn into a career?
Yeah, definitely. The plan was definitely to make it a bit more of a hobby. Was an econ major at Vandy and actually was very involved in the sports econ program there. So even going into law school, I chose Tulane actually, a good law school, but it really is known for its sports law program. And so that's kind of what led me to Tulane. And you mentioned the pro football negotiation competition, which is kind of the number one reason I went, honestly, the biggest event, which is about 48 schools from across the country flying to Tulane, flying to New Orleans with probably 15 to 20 NFL executives, front office members, agents, whatever it may be. And we do mock negotiations, right? So it'll be, all right, it's Amari Cooper's coming up for a new deal this year. You're the agent, you want this amount. You're the team, you want this amount, and hash it out. So I was on the board this year that ran that competition this year. Went pretty well.
Awesome.
And yeah, obviously trying to turn it into a long-term career for sure.
Well, before we get into all the fun and details, if you had your choice, do you see it more on the player representation side of things, the NFLPA side of things, or would you rather go down the path of joining a team for the Bills, maybe becoming the new Jim Ovendorf or someone who's negotiating the contracts for a team? Where do you see your vision in the future?
So I'm definitely hoping to be team side. And as you mentioned, the contract negotiator, generally it's called the football administration director or football administration coordinator, underneath the GM, obviously, or underneath football ops. Yeah, that is the goal. I'm not really trying to do agency. Probably more opportunity there, but also more opportunity to fight over 18-year-olds and not have much success. So
Yeah, that entire recruitment world boggles my mind how that happens, and I don't envy anyone trying to fight through that world. But, I sent over some notes before the show, and I think it's good to kind of set the table here that we've now had a little bit of time. You've seen Brandon Beane have to go through various phases of this, and obviously the initial one was, okay, how can we patch enough holes to be competitive and prepare to really take our medicine? They did that. We somehow were able to make the playoffs in that first year with he and Sean McDermott while getting ready to eat a record NFL dead cap. In that, whether all of those were simply necessary because the player was, terrible or just wasn't the right fit, or just timing wise, we needed to be able to get all of those out of the way. We did that all at once. They didn't kick any cans down the road. They were able to take all of that out. we then went through a couple phases of some pretty strong drafting. And, I don't know that we can expect Brandon Beane to continue to hit with 3, 4, 5 contributors every draft. That's much higher than what the NFL average has been, but we get to benefit from that he's done it 3 years in a row, and we'll cross our fingers that he's just magically better at it than everybody else and continues with it. But at minimum, we now have 3 draft classes coming up. And the real core of what I want to talk through, besides some of the overall thoughts, is we now have this window before all those big extensions come up where all the talent is there, but we're not paying all that much of it. So I thought it'd be fun to talk through. So why don't we start with just your overall thoughts on what you've seen from Brandon Beane, his approach, his strategy, and then we'll start to dig down through some of the details.
Yeah, sure. So I really have kept a close tab on the Bills because I found it interesting. For the most part, I tend to think that hiring the head coach before the GM can be a puzzling move, in my opinion. Just because I feel like the GM is generally more of a long-term thinker, and the head coach is probably more trying to win now. So I probably criticize that move, honestly, like the way they did it. But they're an example of how it can go right. Obviously, they knew each other from Carolina, so maybe a little bit different situation other places. But, McDermott got there, kind of established the culture, kind of established what they were looking to do. And Beane very seamlessly came in and kind of just continued that path. And it really has, gone very well. First thing you mentioned was the complete reset. It was very smart of them to just eat all of that dead money right away, purge the roster. You're going through a rebuild anyways. You're probably going to look for a new quarterback, and as you mentioned, try to capitalize on a rookie window, all of that. So not kicking the can down the road and not trying to, maintain that, that playoff roster that they did have, and kind of falling for that fool's gold was very smart. And it set them up for where they're at now, where you have a clean cap, you have a ton of money coming into this offseason, you have a lot of good rookie contract players, and you're not hampered by old money from old players kind of still sticking around. So in an overall sense, I really do think they've done a great job. From a cap perspective, they've done a phenomenal job, and from a culture perspective, they've really. I mean, you hear players excited about going to join the Bills, just excited about going to talk with them. Which I'm not saying that wasn't always the case, but I don't think you didn't hear as much as you do now. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I'll say there's a couple indicators that you can always tell are real from that, because I think a lot of guys, Josh Allen for one is everything you could want to design off the field for a quarterback. We won't get into that today on whether he's the franchise quarterback or what things he needs to improve on. Off the field, he says every single right thing in every press conference. He's constantly recruiting other players, talking, pumping things up, saying the right things in the media. But beyond that, trickled down throughout the roster over the past 20 years or so, you didn't hear other players chiming in. You didn't hear the non, you know, marketing face of the organization saying anything about recruiting. And now you get these messages constantly, and you see other guys chiming in on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, on all the different social media platforms, recruiting other players when they come up and going out of their way to explain to guys why you can come be your best self in Buffalo, what they've put together with right now the best health and wellness facilities in the entire league. They were able to go through the whole season. At the end of the year, we had 4 or 5 guys with really serious rotator cuff and core groin surgeries that they were able to manage through that during the year. And I think that kind of stuff where they're able to say that, hey, they're going to pay the going market rate. We're not looking to gouge anybody. They're going to give team friendly structure, but if you play well, you can earn your money, and they're going to take care of you in a nice environment that is going to help you stay healthy and earn that next contract. And then you hear the players echoing that and selling that to other free agents and other players and other trade people. We never heard that before. So that's how I take it, as more genuine than just somebody who, hey, it's kind of my job to say good things. You hear other guys echoing that we didn't before.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think you also, touched on a very important piece, which is now that we're in this, social media society. I do think players did look to go to big markets previously because they felt that, both outside of football but also inside of football, just hearing someone's name being mentioned more on ESPN may have led to another good contract, because that's kind of how things work. Now that you can have as big of a voice, in Buffalo as opposed to, in Manhattan, The Bills focused on all those intangibles like you mentioned. Phenomenal health and wellness facility, supporting their players on and off the field, and it's genuine. You can tell it's not, it's not fluff. It is a real. They really care about their players and care about putting them in a position to succeed. Again, both on and off the field. And yeah, like you said, I mean, I see Jordan Poyer tweeting, Trey White tweeting, like all the guys are talking about it for sure.
Yeah, so it's exciting to see that. And now, to explain to some of the folks listening here what we mean by some of that window that you and I had both touched on. Obviously, you're now getting to where that first draft class are coming up on their contract extensions, and we have some very easy ones that guys like Trey White, Deion Dawkins, Matt Milano are players you want back. Right on the heels of that, we're going to have Josh Allen, Tremaine Edmonds, and Harrison Phillips. Right on the heels of that, we're going to have Ed Oliver. You're going to see, hey, is Taron Johnson a guy you want back? Saran Neal, all these other players that they've started to build up. Those are awesome problems to deal with. Of, hey, which of the talented players that we drafted can we afford and want to re-sign? And the benefit of really taking all that medicine is you're not having these problems that all of a sudden, hey, Jacksonville had to give away Calais Campbell, all these other things that people are trying to sell off these contracts just to be able to absorb it. The mass exodus you saw out of Minnesota. Minnesota had one of the most talented rosters in the NFL and just lost 6 or 8 key contributors because they were all getting so expensive. Now we have this window where we haven't quite triggered those extensions yet, and you have this money to play with that if you structure the contracts right, we can have depth that we haven't seen in Buffalo in 25 years, and what I would argue is now gonna be one of the deepest rosters in the NFL in this window this year and next year. Is that something that you think was strategic over these years that he saw coming and is now trying to maximize, and how do you think that can give them a competitive advantage?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you touched on the beginning about having like 3 good draft classes. And I just finished a big research project on the draft. And it really is, it sounds simple, but if you hit like 3 or 4 guys in 2 or 3 years in a row, in the non Patriots category of NFL roster construction, I mean, the Panthers and the Seahawks, when they had their runs, all they really did was just have like 2 or 3 really good draft classes. And then we're just kind of smart in how they built around that. So, the Bills are in a position as well where, yeah, they've had 7 or 8 like really solid hits in these last couple of years, guys that are going to be extreme values on their rookie contracts. But what the Bills are being smart about is when you hit free agency and you have a lot of cap space because you have important contributors on rookie contracts, people can get confused and think you should spend massive money on these free agents and add big time, big money players from outside the organization. What you actually should do is what the Bills are doing, which is supplement the roster with a lot of mid-tier guys, a lot of mid-tier starters, and save that money, that big money, for your own homegrown guys. I mean, Trey White, in my opinion, should probably become the highest paid cornerback in the NFL when
Absolutely.
he's due. Yeah, you mentioned Milano, some of the D-line guys, Harrison Phillips. I mean, those guys should be getting paid big money, and they'll be able to, and the team will be able to fit it under the cap because they didn't go out and spend a ton of money on non-Bills from this offseason. Yeah, so they definitely should be able to kind of maximize that window because, yeah, the luxury of having, 5 or 6 starters on both sides of the ball, they're making, minimum contracts.
And I think that there's a perfect example. I'll just pick one position group. Most teams in the NFL can't afford to go out at linebacker for a third starting linebacker who's going to play 15-20% of snaps, and then a luxury depth backup to play just a special teams demon and give out 6 million a year and 18 million total to AJ Klein and 9 million total, 4.5 million a year. Teams are just not in position to give 10.5 million to nice to have contributors. But when you have Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano making a combined $3 million on their rookie deals, all of a sudden you can afford to do that. And you can add that level of just luxury depth that, hey, if something happens, we now have 2 guys who can step in and would start for a good chunk of teams in the NFL. And now I talk about this all the time. Fans get worried about, oh, are guys going to be worried about their snaps? And I say, guys in the NFL are worried about their snaps before they get paid. They're worried about that when it's stopping them from getting the money they think they deserve. If you're paying a guy at the contributing level that they know they're capable of, they're okay buying in, saying, "Hey, you've already recognized my value to the organization and know that if you need me at that level, I can do that, but I'm okay just being a really high-end special teams contributor and just in case backup middle linebacker because you're already paying me as though I'm playing." So I just think that's a nice window with what they did with AJ Klein and Tyler Matakevich, that most teams can afford to do that at one position group.
Totally. And I think another aspect there, which, again, I don't know if the Bills, thought this intentionally all the way forward, but Milano and Edmonds at the linebacker position excel at what is more valuable, which is coverage. And so their ability to pay mid-tier guys is also because AJ Klein, I'm down in New Orleans. He's a very good run stuffer. He's
Yeah,
a good, solid linebacker, but you probably don't want him taking running backs and tight ends, out of the backfield. But that's okay because you have Tremaine Edmonds, who's the rangiest linebacker I've ever seen. So they're also supplementing with guys that do maybe what they're not, Tremaine Edmonds maybe isn't his best skill, but his best skill is more valuable than what these guys' best skill is, so they can find those value places and find those cheaper contracts.
absolutely, and then even on the other end of the scale, we're praising Brandon Beane, but he's not flawless like anybody else. He's had a couple whiffs here or there. What I really like is instead of doubling down, instead of making it into a dead cap mess, he's gone back to the 3 or 4 contracts that weren't perfect and had maybe some overpay, and now all of a sudden we've seen restructuring of Star Lotulelei. We've seen restructuring of Tyler Croft. We've seen restructuring of Patrick DeMarco. Those 3 combined have netted out to almost $5 million in return money, less into the future, challenges, but also not just cut them outright where you, eat dead cap and where you also lose out on any potential compensatory picks in the future. They've now structured it to where they can come off naturally and benefit from that. So I like the fact that he's even self-aware that, hey, if we're not going to hit every signing out of the park, we're going to limit our liability, try to manage our risk. But if we do miss on one, we're comfortable going back to the team. And I'm going to take that as a tacit approval of the organization as well, that in the past, those guys just wanted to be released. If you were going to go back and the Bills were asking for any money back, man, screw that. If I'm going to have to take a pay cut, I'm going to go to a good team. Now, those guys are willing to accept those pay cuts, willing to accept that restructure because it's worth staying with the organization.
Yeah, no, 110%. I mean, that's a luxury that you only earn through building trust, right?
Yeah.
And as we mentioned earlier, I mean, they're doing all the things correctly and making these guys comfortable and making these guys believe that they have their best intentions in mind and are going to try to put them in a position to succeed. I think Lotulelei was probably the big one where
Yeah.
that was like an impressive event, and that was probably the first one in the series you mentioned. And they kept drafting DL and were addressing that position even with him there. And yeah, but I think he recognizes, I'm probably not going to get a much better deal elsewhere, but I like my situation here. I like, helping maybe groom some of these younger guys. And I don't want to leave. I don't have an incentive to leave because, yeah, I'm making a little bit less money, which isn't ideal, but I still trust that they're going to try to, maybe if I play really well, they'll give me back some money back or give me an
Yeah.
incentive or an escalator that gets me back to where I was in the beginning, which, yeah, I just don't think it was the case beforehand.
Yeah, and it's great to see, and I think one player that certainly has been very common in fans' minds, and maybe you can help with this from an objective outside standpoint. Trent Murphy is the one remaining piece that some fans question. I think I always try to temper that we need to balance between, hey, this guy's a bum, he shouldn't be in the NFL, versus, hey, I kind of wish we were paying Trent Murphy 5 million and not 10 million. And that I think he's much closer to that. I think that, I've tried to warn fans that, hey, if we release him, he's going to be unemployed for like a day. He's an NFL roster caliber guy. Ideally, I'd like him more as our third rotational defensive end. Well, hey, all of a sudden, we add Mario Addison, we add Quentin Jefferson. That's kind of what he is now. And yes, is that a little more than I'd like to spend on that level of contribution? But I have a feeling his agent knows that too. And that my guess, pure guess, is that the team probably did come forward with an offer, and his agent said, we're pretty sure we can get him 5, 6, maybe 7 million on the open market. So if you guys don't think he's worth that, we'll take our chances. Do you think that's a fair guess, or why do you think we haven't seen that with Trent Murphy when we have with the other 3 guys?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. I mean, I do think a bit of a signal was sent just by the fact that, he is still making that good chunk in this year, but they maybe could have tried to negotiate an extension. But to me, Mario Addison almost seems kind of like them choosing for the future, for the next, because Mario Addison's deal, he'll be a bill for this year and next year.
For sure.
And I think that Trent Murphy, maybe could have, like you said, could have been that same, 30-year-old, you know, guy that gets kind of a decent mid-tier deal. And maybe, yeah, maybe his agent and him decided it wasn't in his best interest. So he just said, no, I'll ride out this last year of the deal. It's a little bit more than maybe you want to pay, but then I'm going to be a free agent after this year. And like you mentioned, compensatory picks or something like that. So they're both addressing the future while also letting Trent, kind of see the end of his contract. And yeah, no, it's a good question. I think that it comes with the luxury of having the space that, they, as you mentioned, they want to pay him 5. I think he's making like, what, 7.9 or something like that on the
Yeah.
cap this year. So, other teams maybe don't have that luxury of, all right, we can spend 2.9 million more than we'd like to. The Bills do.
Yeah, and it's just a nice position to be in, and he's a guy that I'm guessing he's gonna be watching the draft pretty intently. If all of a sudden, "Oh, man, Yetur Gross-Matos falls to pick 54," I have a feeling that they're gonna be on the phone trying to figure out what's next, but all of a sudden, if, just the best player available board falls, that our first 3 picks are a running back and a wide receiver and a corner, and all of a sudden it's a developmental 6th rounder, he's probably feeling a little bit better about things,
Right.
so
Yeah.
it's gonna be very interesting. We have a couple positions like that, and I know one we talked about before the show, was the offensive line and how they're maybe not spending at the high end of the pool, and that we didn't bring in a Jack Conklin. We didn't bring in, somebody, a franchise tag guy like Scher for Tooney. But we've brought back all the depth we had last year, which was already a pretty versatile, unit, and added Darrell Williams now, and being in that kind of position is gonna be really interesting. From an outsider, what are your thoughts on where some of those movable pieces could be plugged in?
Yeah, I think that they definitely weren't interested in, adding a Conklin or one of those guys, but I still think they might be interested in maybe like a Jason Peters or a Kelvin
Yeah.
Beachum, kind of a, older guy, but a very good player, very solid player, has a year or two left. Probably get him on, I wouldn't say a discount, but, cheaper than what they were making in their prime. Maybe like a 1 year, $8, $9 million for Peters, something like that. I think they definitely are probably sniffing around that market if I had to guess.
Yeah, I was a big fan of Brian Bulaga. He was the one that I thought fit that, short term, you could pay him enough money where it matters, but he'd come off the books before the Josh Allen, Tremaine Edmonds deals start to come through. He was the one I really wanted. So I've been a little jealous. The Chargers stole Linval Joseph and Chris Harris and Brian Bulaga. All 3 of those were on my wish list. I was a little jealous of what they put together, but one of the last things I wanted to go through here, are there any other potential targets or spots on the team that you could still see? I know I threw out, I could still see maybe somebody coming in to push for that RB2 before the draft, maybe an upgrade to TJ Yeldon. The recent deals for EJ Gaines, I think, kind of gives some competition for Taron Johnson in the nickel. I know obviously adding Darrell Williams is another movable piece on the offensive line if we don't add another, core tackle that's out there. Any other areas that you could see them making a move?
Yeah, I put a couple down here, and you could push back on this if maybe I'm not, don't know the roster as well as you do, but I still think they could maybe make a splash at edge and maybe be in the Ngakwe conversation. I mean, I've seen the name floated a bunch, and so maybe they're interested there. And then I'm wondering at outside corner. I know they've made a lot of mid-tier additions, obviously
Yeah.
Josh Norman, all that, but I mean, Logan Ryan, who's maybe one of the better free agents still available. Maybe that's a little bit too much, but I can see them still addressing corner. I mean, McDermott is, one of the reasons I like him. There's no such thing as too many cornerbacks on your roster,
Yeah.
and he agrees with that philosophy. So I can see that as well.
Yeah, we usually carry more DBs than most teams, and they like that flexibility to be able to mix and match. We have a lot of special teams contributors from there, a lot of versatile pieces. We ended up having Saran Neal played nickel, played outside corner, played safety. Dean Marlowe played safety, played nickel, played the big nickel, played some will linebacker. They like having those versatile pieces. I'm actually really excited. I'd love to see them take a stab at a Kyle Duggar, or Jeremy Chin, or Tanner Muse or someone like that in the draft to be able to compete at that spot as well. Um, as we're kind of wrapping up the overall thoughts here, give Bills fans some ideas, reasons to be optimistic, reasons to be able to look forward to what's being built here from an outside view. I had brought up that some fans got a little frustrated with, leaning into that Carolina connection thing, and that the re-signing a bunch of our own players and bringing guys back, and that I have a feeling there's gonna be a silver lining to that in that OTAs are out the window right now.
Yeah.
Nobody knows when training camp's gonna start. If we're bringing back, in my mind, 21 of 22 starters right now, plus I think I counted 27 of our top 33 contributors. We had Lorenzo Alexander retire. We lost, Shaq Lawson and Jordan Phillips were legitimate, but we replaced them with Mario Addison, Quentin Jefferson, and Vernon Butler. Veteran defensive linemen can usually buy into a program pretty quickly because it's, hey, go get that guy.
Right.
Um, whereas the entire offensive line is back. All the receivers are back. We're adding Stephon Diggs, which is a wonderful problem to have, but only one real core offensive piece. Having that continuity and that the guys we're adding are, hey, Josh Norman already knows the system. Darrell Williams already knows the system. Mario Addison already knows the system. Vernon Butler already knows the system. I think there might be a silver lining to what some fans were rolling their eyes about, and now we might reap some benefits of that.
Yeah, 100%. I think you're seeing that league wide. Every offseason you always see, oh, this guy used to play for this coach back in XYZ year, but I think it's even more this year for sure. And I think they are. They're worried that there might be a shortened or no, offseason. And so, I'm a Bears guy, even, the Foles deal, not that I'm ecstatic about it, but yeah, I mean, he's worked with every guy, on the offensive side of the ball. So it makes sense from that perspective. But then also, on the second part of it, and reason for optimism is I won't get into Josh Allen. I'm not an
Sure.
evaluator, so I'm not going to. But you're not going so all in to the point where if he does become Mitchell Trubisky, like we're dealing with, that you're hampered in your ability to move on, and where you can't really move on, right? I mean, the Bears came into this offseason with a lot of holes, and they've addressed like none of them, in my opinion, because they can't. Because they had to make their big splash move at quarterback, and it's Nick Foles, which again, whatever. And, and so the Bills are addressing everything. That they're plugging holes. It could work out. It might, but if it doesn't, they have an ability to very quickly reload and hit it right again and see if they can run it back and keep that core they have and not miss a step.
Yeah, and I think the one thing Bills fans should hold on to, and obviously I've come full circle. I was devastated on draft day. I did not want Josh Allen. He's completely won me over and is the kind of person I want to root for. I saw enough improvement from year one to year two to at minimum convince myself that, hey, he wasn't one of those elite 11 guys. He wasn't one of those guys going to an air raid offense in college. There were genuine evaluators that both Joe Marino and I talked to that said, we're not exaggerating here. We legitimately think he was 10,000 reps behind Baker Mayfield, and that
Right.
he just literally had thrown the ball that many fewer times by not being in that situation. That I think there's a better than normal chance that you see improvement from year two to year three that you may not get from a guy who was maybe more pro ready coming into the league. Now, he has to improve. There are areas he needs to do that. But the biggest solace that Bills fans have is we're going to know by the end of this year. They've now built, I will argue, the best other 52 in the
Right.
NFL. Maybe arguable with San Francisco, Baltimore, some other teams like that. Their other 52 guys are the deepest roster in the NFL. You now added Stephon Diggs. You have the exact same line back with some additional complements to it. We haven't even seen what they do in the draft. We're going to have what was already a top 3 defense in the NFL, and we added pieces to that. They're going to know for sure and going to be able to make an informed decision. Now, obviously, we're all hoping that it's an easy yes and that next spring we simply exercise that fifth year option, which from the math I'm seeing is going to be 23, 24 million at just the fifth year option with the new numbers. And it's guaranteed in the fourth year and the fifth year before you even get into the extension. So that's a legitimate number now. That's not some easy decision, but they're going to have all this season to decide that and to be able to see him play. And I think all of us are going to know in our gut after what we see with this roster they put around him that either, yeah, this is our guy, let's go, or hey, we got to plan elsewhere. So obviously, I'm hoping sadly, not to be in your guys' position that
Yeah.
you're in that Trubisky spot. But if they are, you've built all those other structures. You don't have to make that decision on the fifth year option, and you could pivot if you need to because they're already building in that 23, $24 million bubble, and that we all hope it goes to Josh Allen. But if it doesn't, there's other people you could give $24 million to make this roster work.
Yep. And like you said, it's a luxury where I mean, again, like guys get hurt, whatever, but you have a good roster everywhere else where you'll know, like if it doesn't work on offense, like you probably know, who the where the issue lies, right? And so that's key because it's very easy to just assume or just to fall for, well, if he had this piece here, if he had this piece there, maybe it's not him. Yeah, it takes that aspect, that element out of it. So no, 100%. And as you mentioned, you've obviously earmarked that money for that year, so worst case scenario, it doesn't work out. The first year cap hit of you signing a free agent quarterback, or if that's the route you have to go, you'll already have probably more than you need for that person. And if the roster is as great as it looks, you have another good draft class, you could sign like a Teddy Bridgewater of 2021, whatever,
Yeah.
2022, and that could be a 12-win team for all you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the good fortune here. So again, I don't want any fans to think that we're planning as though we need to move on from Josh Allen. I'm not. I do think that he has the legitimate potential to be the answer that we need. But the great part is that Brandon Beane has built a roster that we're able to make that informed decision, find that out in a legitimate environment. It's not, how many other guys have we seen where they had to question afterwards, oh, well, did we give him enough weapons? Did we give him enough protection? I'm not really sure. Maybe we should sign him up anyways. And then, how do teams feel now about the deal Nick Foles got, the deal that Jared Goff got, the deal that, these other quarterbacks have signed that now you're like, well, I guess I'm not really sure. Was it them? Was it the system? What was going on? Now they're going to be able to make that informed decision. And obviously we all hope that it's, an easy yes. But either way, they've protected themselves in case it's not.
Yep, 100%.
All right. Well, I think this was great. Really appreciate you taking the time to be able to come in, and it's nice to get an outsider view. I know I joked before the show that I try to be objective, but I can't hide my homerism. I'm still a dyed-in-the-wool Bills fan, so I'm always going to look for that rose-colored glasses view of things. So it's nice to be able to talk to somebody from the outside and see that I'm not tricking myself into these things. We really are taking a methodical, intelligent approach to putting this together, and it's been fun to see there. What do you have coming up here that the fans can watch out for? Again, anybody who's listening, Brad is an awesome follow. He's really great about getting back with people and answering stuff. It's at Brad OTC for Over the Cap. Check out the stuff they have going on there. What do you have coming up here that people can keep an eye out for?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, thank you for having me on. I had a great time as well. Definitely an informed chat. You're not a homer. I've probably been on 10 different teams this podcast now. You're definitely measured. I actually I wrote a book that dropped today actually.
Oh,
So
awesome.
yeah, great timing. Well, the paperback version just dropped today on Amazon. I just tweeted out from my account at Brad OTC. It is basically analyzing the NFL draft. It's all about draft value, draft trades, anything related to the draft. Yeah, and you can find me at OverTheCap.com. I'll be putting out free agency content, probably a lot of draft content coming up. Yeah, and as you mentioned, I try to answer every single question I can on Twitter, and I think I do a pretty good job. So any question you have, just shoot it at Brad OTC, and I'll get back to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, man. What's the name of the book?
It's called The Drafting Stage.
The drafting stage. It's awesome. I'll put it in the shoot it to me in the our DM here, and I'll put it in the links to the show so people can check that out. That's awesome.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, we'll do.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you guys in the chat. It was an awesome time today. Again, I say this every show. We're here to be able to be a healthy outlet and distraction. I know there's a lot of information out there and a lot of people trying to decide what's best for themselves, for their families. I just ask you, be kind, be considerate. Check on your friends, check on your neighbors, check on your elderly relatives. You can do a lot just like Brad and I are doing right now via Zoom, via Skype, via FaceTime. You can check in with people and make sure they're holding up and doing okay. I just did a video chat for my daughter to get together with a handful of kids from their kindergarten class just to be able to talk and hang out and have fun. Be creative and find a way to help us get through here. And I hope that, myself and Eric and the rest of the guys can be a voice and an outlet for you as this is going on, and just a small break to get away from all the difficulties of what reality is throwing at us right now. So just be kind to each other, be considerate, and we'll get through this together. You have been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.